Hey, friends, welcome back to the podcast. And I'm excited for you to meet my new guest, Michael Lecy, on the podcast. But first, um, I have a sponsor now. Cole's Media Company is sponsoring the podcast, at least for several episodes. We'll see. We'll see how long. But Cole's Media Company is a full service branding and media agency. And Cody is helping me to give my website a facelift since it's from I don't know, I think I created it in 2010. So it's a few years old. Definitely needs to be updated. Anyway, I'm excited about some of the stuff that he's already doing for the website. And I'm going to put his website in the show notes. So if you need some help with any kind of uh, media or if you know someone, then would you just reach out and give him a shout out and give him some business. Tell him I sent you. All right. Um, so in this episode, I interview Michael Lecy, and Michael Lecy has his own podcast. He's a licensed counselor, and he's also a certified coach, life coach. But he was previously a pastor. And so on his podcast, he tells his story of spiritual abuse, which has kind of been the running theme for a little while here, right? And so we talk about spiritual abuse, what it means to kind of be an ex-evangelical, how to find your footing again as you leave the evangelical church. And so some of that processing, deconstructing, reconstructing. And I know we've talked about that a lot through the last several episodes, but I feel like everybody has a slightly different approach. And so the more people you hear their stories, uh, this experience that many of us are having or have had, and gives, like, I don't know, gives you permission to that doesn't have to look a certain way, right? That you can just allow it to flow and unravel the however it's supposed to, and detangle all of the stuff so that you can then put it back together and become your authentic self. I was watching I don't know, it was a TikTok or a YouTube clip, but uh, this guy was talking about frequencies and the energies that we give off. Um, and he was talking about it from a scientific approach because that's his background is anyway, he was telling a story about they wanted to see if they can measure the frequencies that different emotions give off. And so they took a group of people and they put them inside a Faraday cage. So, which I feel like this is like an episode of The Blacklist or Fringe or something like that. But anyway, they put them inside this Faraday cage and they were reading the different frequencies. And one of the things he said, which was very interesting to me, was he said that he asked the question to the audience, which emotion do you think gives off the highest frequencies? And several people said love, which uh, like I would have thought that too, right? But he said it actually is authenticity. Like if you've listened to the podcast for very long, or if you've heard me preach, you know that like that's what I'm all about, right? Like just it's finding a way for us to be authentic, who we are, um, who we were created to be, and then so that our actions and our words line up the inside. Um, anyway, I'm just kind of clinging to that right now. This idea that the more authentic you can be, the higher energy you give off. And I think that's really what makes you more attractive is when you're, part of it is just we're in a world right now where can we trust anybody? Who can we trust? Is everybody lying to us? And the people who are authentic are far and few between. I hope you are one of those people, or at least striving to be, right? At least striving to be an authentic to who you are, right? So anyway, I think we're going to kind of that's kind of the theme of this episode. I think you'll hear some of that in there, and there'll be some great takeaways. So a couple more people coming up on the podcast that I am excited for, that we are that I'm trying to schedule into the new year. I know, right? But it is December, so Christmas is only like what, 20 days away, something like that. I don't know. I guess it's the 5th that I'm recording this intro. So, all right. Enjoy the episode. We've been trying to tell better stories about women and clergy and the church because we really need to tell better stories. Instead of just complaining about it, what if we flood the airwaves with something different?
The little lady that tells you that's so funny.
Right? I know. Hey, now, can you go by Michael or Mike?
Michael's great.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, that's cool. My firstborn is Michael also, and I call him Michael, but they go by Mike now. So
Really?
yeah.
See, it was the opposite for me. I was Mike in high school, and then in college, I was like, I think I like Michael.
Right?
It's more my vibe. Yeah. So I've
Uh,
stuck with it.
yeah, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I've been enjoying listening to your podcast and getting caught
Oh,
up
thank you.
on several of your episodes and stuff. And
Yeah.
I heard your story, your
Mm-hmm.
of spiritual abuse and
Mm-hmm.
some of that stuff, which is really what intrigued me about your podcast.
Yeah.
But can we go I want to go further back than that story,
Sure.
because I want to talk about
Sure.
how did you become a pastor? Like, did you grow up in the church? Like, how did that whole thing happen for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So definitely grew up as like more of a spiritually curious kid, and then had parents who, it was so strange. My dad would have these kind of moments where he really wanted to talk about God. God was this big deal to him. When he was 22, he had this radical experience, but we were never a part of a church. And then in middle and high school, we kind of settled down and started going to an Assemblies of God church. So pretty charismatic. And that was the first place that, like, okay, that's where I went to youth group in middle and high school. That's where I had a lot of my significant religious experiences. But then went to college, kind of fell away from that, came back to it, and started going to a secretly Southern Baptist, but really just like non-denominational mega church in Ames, Iowa, and fell in love with the idea of preaching and leading people, and got to lead like the freshman ministry when I was a senior and do all of that stuff. And like, it's so funny, hindsight being 2020, in that moment there was so much genuine that I was like, I want to help people. This is what I'm supposed to do. This is what I want to do. I want to learn how to preach and teach, and had that desire to be charismatic and on stage, and loved leading people. And I think there's just this part of me too that was like, I want to be special and I want to be significant, and this seems to be a way for me to receive praise from pastors, men in ministry, who give that to me where I didn't have it growing up, and also find a way for people to find that I'm special and valuable and helpful to them. So that's where it started. Was like a middle school pastor intern for a few years, then became this middle school pastor, did that for 6 years. And when I think about ministry, those are my favorite years, because like middle schoolers, as you've raised a few of them, they're so weird and don't know anything about life, and are just so honest and raw and open. And so getting to take care of them and that honesty was really cool. Then I moved into college ministry role, and that's like the big deal in the salt company. Like, if you're a college pastor, you're kind of celebrity status. And so I thought that was so great. I was like, had a staff of 12 and led 400 students, and thought that I had made it. And then shortly after that is when a lot of that stuff all fell apart. But that's kind of the quick version. I don't know if you want me to dig into any more of those parts, but that's how I ended up a pastor, for sure.
Uh, well, actually, let's talk about that a little bit more because I feel
Hmm.
like this kind of segues into some of the stuff that you experience.
Hmm.
And I appreciate your honesty and your vulnerability on the, hey, there was a void, and
Hmm.
it was meeting this, right there, this
Yeah.
to be affirmed, to be praised. I mean, we all want to be special, right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
uh, I'm gonna guess you're a millennial, right? And
Yes.
you know,
Yep.
so I, I'm Gen X. We're used to being ignored, so like,
Oh my gosh, that's so spot
right?
on.
So it doesn't matter, but uh,
Oh.
I think that there is a sense where we have this hole, and
Mm.
it lures us in, right? And so I
Hmm.
appreciate you sharing that, and I think
Hmm.
um some people, some other, as we get into the church, right, and more people who are more narcissistic, like they
Hmm.
see that a mile away, and they
Yeah.
like, yeah, we like have a target on our back if when we tend to
Oh my
be,
gosh, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
So you were teaching teens and young adults, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah, so the spiritual abuse experiences I had happened, the first place was when I was the college pastor. So
Gotcha.
college age students, and then in California when I eventually moved, I was technically the kids pastor, but it was COVID, so we weren't meeting, so I was just kind of there.
Yeah. So will you talk then a little bit about how did that happen? Because you said those are really great years, and then was there like a
Hmm.
shift, or
Yeah.
how did this, or was it more of a revelation?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the truth is that when I look back, I had plenty of negative experiences with the lead pastor when I was a middle school pastor. But when your livelihood and your belonging is wrapped up in that community, you kind of put up with a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't otherwise. Um, and so for me, that's why I tolerated that. But the big shift when I was a college pastor happened because I became deeply unsatisfied with how I viewed God or my relationship with Jesus. It just felt so hollow or distant. And like I was telling people at the time, I always felt like I lived in God's house, but we never were in the same room. And I became very curious about, is there something more available to me? And as I discovered theology that did offer that, quickly became at odds with the lead pastor of the church that I was the college pastor of. And so it was a year of me rethinking so much, still in the confines of pretty traditional belief, but rethinking everything I thought I knew and realizing it was diametrically opposed to the ways that my pastor was doing things. Like I wanted to pray more. I wanted to have better answers for why women couldn't preach or teach. I wanted to throw out this idea of predestination and question Calvinism. And at each of those questions, I was met with, no, no, that's not how we do things. Like at one point, he even said, I don't like the Holy Spirit because I can't control it. And for the pastor of a church, that was like a red flag to me, like not a good thing. And I also then met a community of people that I would eventually be a part of as a pastor who were affirming all these new beliefs that I had, and something was happening in the college ministry. But then, kind of as the year went on and my relationship with this pastor kept deteriorating, we spent 6 days in a hospital with one of my sons because he had some fluid in his brain. They had to take it out. And the day after we really miraculously, unexpectedly got out of the hospital when we didn't think we would be out for a very long time, the pastor told me I didn't have a job, but he did it in a very unpleasant kind of, he said things like, pretend your son isn't sick while we have this conversation, and lied about how much he would compensate me, and really said things like, I've given up on you. Like, there's really no way we can save this, things like that. And so it kind of was this dual trauma where, okay, we just got out of the hospital, we're not out of the woods. And now you're suddenly telling me, you're telling me that I don't have a job. Like I was not able to stay really in any way. So that's kind of that hall exploded.
Yeah. So like your theology is expanding,
Yep.
and your understanding of God is expanding, and I'm guessing probably your relationship with God is coming into a completely new
Yes.
realm. And yeah,
Yes.
uh and that's uncontrollable. Like I like how
Oh
you
yeah.
said that because this, the comment that you made about your pastor saying the Holy Spirit, I can't control the Holy Spirit, is spot on. Like that is a
Yeah.
lot of it's a lot of what I see in the church is this idea that
Mm.
um we have an obsession with being able to control
Oh my gosh.
God
Yeah.
and what other people think and how they behave, and
Mm.
um how do you control an omnipresent spirit? But
Right.
good
It's
luck with that.
when you really think about it, it's just like this is absurd. Like, and also, why would you want a God you could control? What a
Right,
puny God, as
I
the Hulk
know,
would say.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think in your story you talked about how um there were in this process with your son being ill,
Hmm.
um the just unrealistic expectations that you shouldn't even be there at the hospital with him.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. So he just seemed to have no comprehension for the gravity of the situation and was even telling me like, well, I expect you back at work. It's college kickoff season. Like and that's a big problem with mega churches. Like if we could just park for a second, they move at such a fast speed and productivity is demanded of them because they have to keep producing to keep people interested because it's essentially a McDonald's and a Walmart for Jesus mixed into one, that they never slow down to actually question, are our methods working? Because they work, right? People are coming, people are giving, but is it actually good for people what we're doing? Is the way we're treating people okay? And then when you have this ultimate end of human salvation, well, you can justify anything. So you're moving at this high speed. You say, well, it's for Jesus. Things are going to happen. It's the whole Mark Driscoll. Well, there's bodies behind the bus, and I don't have to look in the rearview mirror because this is all for Jesus. And I think in his mind, he was like, yeah, but this is it. Like it becomes your whole life in that context. It swallows you up, and you never slow down long enough to go, is this actually good for me or anyone else?
Yeah, and there's no doing life with one another at
No.
at the speed of reality, like
Yep.
reality
Yep.
was your life stopped. Like the rest of the world kept
Yeah.
going on, but your life stopped for a period
Yeah.
of time, and I'm guessing probably longer than 6 days, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
anytime there's something traumatic where you end up in the hospital, it's
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's anywhere from weeks to months of recovery afterwards. um
Mm-hmm.
and and then to all of a sudden you have no, and there may be people who are listening that don't understand this, but we don't get work, we don't get unemployment.
Nope. Not at all. And the HR stinks and the benefits are bad and it's all just gnarly. Like my maternity leave for my twins when we had them was a week. I had to use a week of vacation to make it longer. Like it's just like you said, they don't live in reality because the mission is the goal.
Yeah. So I had a therapist on here not too long ago, and she used the phrase reality collapse, um,
Mm,
where like because we're just kind of going along, and then all of a sudden there's like the reality that we have built collapses, and then we start to
geez.
realize all the dysfunction that's around us. So
Yeah.
do you think that happened in this place, in that role, or was it the next role that you went to that you really experienced your
Hmm.
reality collapse?
I think this was the first one. So if I was falling down a mountain, I made it probably halfway down with that first experience because I still landed in a church, in a theology that was now charismatic, like signs and wonders mixed with spiritual transformation and disciplines. And really at first, like I had such rose-colored glasses on through that whole experience until it started to deteriorate. And then it was after that, when that one went badly, that I realized that if I was going to have a relationship with God, I had to fundamentally reconsider how I thought God actually worked. Because in the span of 2 years, 2 years, like the same week, 2 years apart, these two church things exploded. And I was just left like when a bomb goes off in a movie, and your ears are ringing. When I came to, I realized I had to answer the question of how does God respond, act, exist, control whatever in suffering? Like it was, how does God speak to human suffering? What is his role in it? How involved is he in what just happened to me or not? And that moment also broke my reality open to, oh, and there's a bunch of other human beings who are as traumatized or more than me for lots of
Mm,
other reasons. Does what I believe actually work for them anymore? And that's when reality really caved in and it all changed.
yeah. Um, so did that happen? So I'm curious, like,
Mm-hmm.
did the reality kind of collapse and that pushed you out of that church, or did you get pushed out of the church and
Mm.
then the reality kind of
Yeah. So I believe pretty wholeheartedly, without being able to diagnose him, that the pastor that I ended up the second round, he was in California. I think he's narcissistic at best, and or deeply wounded at best, and narcissistic at worst, is what I mean. And quickly being there, we realized there was this massive pay disparity. There was this weird treatment of him. There was this distance between him and the staff. There was this kind of odd Moses like leadership where he had all this spiritual authority and he had all these people from other churches who were kind of controlling why he was in power. No one questioned him. I got there again, foolishly assuming everyone was like him because him and I had cultivated a long distance relationship, and then quickly realized like I had 10 more years of experience in ministry than everybody else I was working with, but I was paid one of the lowest salaries because I was new there. And quickly like was even told, oh, you have way more skills than we thought. There's lots of other things we could do. They never happened. I was supposed to learn how to plant a church, never came to. Was told like, yeah, if you ever need anything, just ask. When I was asked, we got laughed at. Like there were just all these strange things. And I'm an Enneagram 9, but I have a pretty strong 8 wing. And so my 8 wing came out swinging and was just like, this is BS. Like something's not right. And so started poking and prodding, getting a little passive aggressive, like no longer tolerating the way that I was treated. And by me no longer kind of falling in line, they found a way to take a situation where I was talking to another church about not, it was not even a formal job interview, but just like a meet and greet. Cause I was told I wouldn't have a job there because what they were going to pay me. I was like, okay, we're going to be done. But they got to take that, use it as this twist of you're betraying us. We're going to get rid of you. They had these mystery sources that said we were gossiping about them, that they never told us the names of these people. Like it was just this whole song and dance. If you've ever read When Narcissism Comes to Church, I swear he wrote that about that place. And so them pushing us out and kind of saying goodbye was the final collapse into a new reality that I wasn't ready for at that time.
yeah. And that's a lot. Like that's that's 2 really intense years. Of course, we had 2020 in there, so that doesn't help. But
Yes. Yeah.
um,
In the midst of that, right?
right. I mean, we all have PTSD from 2020.
We really
Uh,
do.
I'm right. I know collectively, I think
Mm-hmm.
as uh, a global society,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's been intense. So
Oh my gosh.
how how did you how did you start to process that to move forward?
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
guess I'm curious, like what were some of the first things that you did where you're like, okay, I need to start deconstructing more, or I
Yeah.
need to completely revamp this? Like how did that start to happen for you?
Yeah. So it was pretty gradual at first because I had started the podcast. Like if you go to my podcast at the beginning, you will see it seems like he's very Christian, but then it's almost like I've thought about taking down old episodes, but for me, it's almost this like honest revelation of he changed. Something in here changed. His guests start to change, his opinions, his attitude, the theology he's comfortable with radically changes. Like it's a clear kind of catalog of my journey, which is helpful for me timeline wise too. But for me, it was okay. I stopped reading the Bible and I stopped listening to worship music for like 4 months. I just detoxed. Author Brad Jersak, he
Mm.
kind of gave me that advice. He's like, just detox, just don't pick it up, leave it alone, let it get out of your system. And so did that and just kind of focused on taking care of my kids, being present to my family. We were in a privileged position where I could take 5 months off to really emotionally and mentally recover from what had just happened before we decided what to do next. And then I had a really good friend who I'm still really good friends with tell me about a guy named Richard Rohr. And so picked up one of his books, picked up a couple Rob Bell books, started to read those, then got introduced to the open and relational theology with Tom Ord. And for me, once I found that there were other answers out there, like I literally, the Universal Christ, like this book broke it wide open for me. It's like right there. I was like, oh, there's such a bigger, broader landscape for how I think God operates, who I think God is, and um, much more satisfying answers for suffering. And the interesting thing, it was also answers that made sense of why the Bible was so bizarre or why a lot of that stuff didn't work. And then I just became insatiable, like devouring podcasts, reading 3 or 4 books a month, like doing everything I could to just consume as much knowledge as possible. And that's kind of how it all had just kept going and going and going and going.
Wow. Yeah, that would, and those authors would definitely be very challenging for your Southern
Yeah.
Baptist churches.
Yes. Yep. Yep. And even the
Yeah,
charismatic ones, like the pastor in California once told my friend who gave me the Richard Rohr book, he said to him, be careful, you might read Richard Rohr and stop being a Christian. So again, someone that they were afraid of, who they saw outside of traditional Christian belief. And I was like, wait, the way I'm understanding reality, the way I've had experiences, listening to the suffering of other people, these answers that Richard and Rob and those guys give, Brad Jersak for the Bible, those things, that makes way more sense. And I have to do less mental gymnastics or cognitive
right.
dissonancing in
Yeah,
order to believe it. And that was really satisfying.
yeah. And ironically, they're more orthodox though.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So much of the Eastern Orthodox has been doing this for years. And they're just like, you're now just catching on.
Right? Oh man,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
Now I'm forgetting everybody, but Jonathan Foster was talking about how like um the Eastern Orthodox Church never subscribed to the Western view of hell. Like,
Right. Oh my
yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
Yeah. So again, like, and that's what I love about the internet now. And like there's so many things wrong with the internet, right? We could point them out everywhere. But one of the best things is that people like the Eastern Orthodox teachers and traditions, they're now becoming more mainstream. So this dominant, like Western view of hell and how church works, it's being eroded. And I think that's for the best in so many different ways.
yeah. Um, so who are you reading now that's kind of really challenging and expanding your understanding?
Yeah. So Catherine Keller, she's a process theologian. She's amazing. So she wrote a book called On the Mystery. And then uh, Isla Delio or Illa Delio, I'm always not sure how to say her name. She's got some amazing stuff out there. Um, but really recently, I read, I know we talked about this, I read Rob Bell's fiction book,
Oh
and that
yeah,
was really good, just super fun. And I'm not reading as voraciously and intensely because I've come to a personal place of like comfort and I'm less like desperate to find answers and more realizing there's a lot of what I think I'm comfortable believing inside of me now. I want to sit with it and let it incubate and see what comes out of me from it. And that's kind of where it is now. But I tell everybody, like, if you're just trying to understand what the heck do I do with the Bible, I would say Brad Jersak is like my favorite first start. He's seen it all, done it all, and really gives a beautiful perspective when you're first in that place.
yeah. I like Her Gates Will Never Be Shut is fabulous.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
I did read his um Embers book, the one that's on
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Out of the embers.
Out
Yep.
of the Embers. Yeah, that
hmm
was really good too.
hmm
That was kind of one of
Yeah.
my first. I mean, I've been reading Rob Bell and Richard Rohr for
Hmm.
years. And but I'm like, I need to do some deeper work. And so yeah, I read the Out of the Embers
Mm.
and I'm like, yeah, okay, I
Hmm.
need to start moving down this road. So I'm gonna check out some of
Yeah.
those two women that you mentioned. But um
Oh, they're
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Hmm.
Uh the oh man, okay. So now you've been how long have you been out of the church, so to
Mm.
speak, or
For
out of
about 3.5 years. Yeah, maybe 3 years.
okay,
Close
so like
to. Hmm.
end of 2020, beginning of 21, is that when you kind of
Beginning of 21, so maybe more like 2.5. Like 2020 felt like 10 years, I think, to
right?
all of
It
us. So
did.
I'm always thrown off by that. But yes. So out of the church since 2021. Hmm.
So where kind of where are you now? Are you like um ministry wise, work wise, like
Yeah.
what's helping you to take all the gifts, right? And
Yeah.
all the graces that God has given you, and then say, okay, now I'm gonna
Yeah.
give back, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I became a therapist, so finishing school and licensing here very soon because I realized I still want to help people and want to do that professionally and felt like that was a really great way to do that and have loved it. So I'm doing that. But then, kind of right after that last experience in 2021, I started posting on Instagram just like little poems or sayings or ideas and thoughts about my church hurt experiences and started to find friends who I hadn't met yet, but have become friends through that. My words started really offering people solidarity, which again, my intent was just, I'm going to put it out there as an act of my own agency. No one can control me. You don't get my narrative. I'm going to tell the truth the way that I've experienced it. And then people started to really resonate with it and really find hope and belonging in it. And so over time, I then started letting people know, hey, if you need resources or if you need a spiritual companion or if you just want somebody to help you process all of this stuff, I can do that. So I do therapy, and then I also do specific deconstruction work or spiritual expansion work where we'll read books. I'll read books with people, go through podcasts. They'll ask me really hard questions. I'll usually say, I don't know. What do you think? Like, and just make space for that. And then I have the podcast, A Certain Wandering, where I have conversations with people from all kinds of backgrounds, atheists to Buddhists to Eastern Orthodox to I had one of my dearest friends. Her name's Sophie. She's still very much in the Reformed camp. She's over in the UK, but she's such a wonderful, tender, open soul. Had that conversation with her. So I do that. And then I do make funny reels in order to process my trauma in a dark humor kind of way.
Yeah. So on your Instagram, are you on Instagram as Michael Lacey, or are you on there as A Certain Wandering?
Well, they both have a page in order
Oh,
to
gotcha.
make things easier for me. But my personal page is where I do all of that writing and kind of thought provoking. And like one of my favorite things is I throw up the question box and I let people ask me any question they want. And I'll answer it from my perspective. I'll offer them resources, podcasts. Just my goal is to make a safe, curious space with my little Instagram squares where people can experience solidarity from what I say and the freedom to go on the same journey. That's my little tagline for it.
Yeah, I like the idea of a safe, safe, safe journey, safe place.
Hmm.
I guess I don't follow you on Instagram. I'll have to see if I do or not. At least I haven't seen
Yeah.
you. I haven't seen you in a while. If I do.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so you're getting ready to um, now. Now, do you have your own practice, or are you working with a group?
I'm finishing up my internship with a practice, but then hopefully I'll go independent when I can. But I do all of my spiritual companionship and life coaching and spiritual direction on my own.
Oh, okay, good.
So,
Okay, cool. So people can reach out
yes,
to you for that, because I know there are a lot of people who
yes.
um, that just don't even know where to get started in the deconstructing
Hmm.
and processing their
Hmm.
spiritual wounds, and a lot of it too is like they're not either well, a lot of them just aren't ready for counseling.
Totally.
Or yeah, or
Yeah.
they feel like, because there's kind of a, with counseling, you're like, do I get a Christian counselor? Do I get not get a Christian? Like,
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean?
It's hard. Yeah. It's really hard. It's complex. It's hard to I've talked to a lot of people who say what I offer them is like I get it. Whereas some therapists they have to kind of explain evangelical culture
Mm.
or theology before they can really talk about it. And I think because I've lived it, I'm usually like, oh, yep, I know what that feels like, or yep, I know why that's a nervous thing to ask, or yep, it's okay that you may still have worries about hell even after you've decided you don't believe in it. That's totally normal, you know?
Right? Yeah, I find that it's just with my own counselor, and I'm
Mm,
like, I have sometimes I have to explain the evangelical world, and then I have to explain this being a pastor world. and
yes.
and then
Oh my
I'm like,
gosh, yeah.
yeah. So like I spent 20 minutes setting it up, and then I'm like, okay, now here's what I want to talk.
It's so real. You have to do so much setup. It's so real. And sometimes for people that's exhausting where again, solidarity. Like if I could limit like boil it down to one word is I just want to offer people solidarity. Because when you know you're not having that experience alone or you're not the first person to have it, there's so much freedom and there's less pressure and fear usually. And then you don't feel so isolated. And that's a really good feeling.
Yeah. What are some of, like, if people are wondering where to start,
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
because I do have a lot of clergy on here who
Hmm.
find themselves in a similar place, right? Our livelihood depends
Hmm.
on this, you know,
Yes. Yes.
and not just our livelihood, but our identity is wrapped up in it.
Oh, for real.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I guess, like, what are a couple of first steps that people can do that, like, they're not ready to say, I'm going to surrender my credentials, or they're not ready to say, I'm walking away from this, but they know that internally there's conflict.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say first and foremost, um, don't resist the conflict because my experience is that a lot of my evangelical beliefs taught me to ignore the feelings I was having and the intuitive sense my body was trying to give me. And I can even look back at certain times and interactions where I think that deep resonance inside of me was telling me not to do something, but I did it anyways because I wanted to belong or because I thought it was just what you were supposed to do. And so I would say, if you have the freedom and space to explore it and listen to it and actually admit that it's there, do it sooner than later because it's only going to make it like you'll have feelings of, am I a fraud? Am I lying to the people when I teach them this? Like, I couldn't look anyone in the face anymore and tell them honestly that I was like, "Oh yeah, God's going to answer your prayer," or or like praying prophetically for people. I think very differently about that now, but I could no longer look at someone and say like, "I think God is saying." Like I couldn't do it anymore, and I was being asked to do that, and I was like, "Oh no, I can't. I have to be honest about this and straightforward with it." And so I would say, if you can find a safe person who you can like tell all this to, find it. I know that that's a privilege in a lot of ways, but like my wife and a few friends who don't even live near me now are my safe places to have those experiences with. Um, and I don't know, like I think that if you are allowed to doubt and ask questions, then great. But usually pastors are paid to be the ones who don't ever doubt and always have something to say. So that tension is really real. And I think it's okay if you have a family to feed, if you stay where you're at for a few more months instead of just saying, well, I have to be honest about this now. Like, there's nothing I think dishonoring about taking care of your family, even if it means you have to do or stay in a place that feels like there's conflict there. But I don't think you can do it forever. Is that kind of what you were looking for? Or is that helpful?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Uh, and I think for there will come a point. Well, I shouldn't say there will. For me, there did. For me, there came a point where I'm like, I knew I was so much out of harmony with what
Yeah.
was going on internally that
Yep.
I felt like I was being a fraud.
Yep.
Yeah.
100% same. And that was not good because a lot of people I know in that position, they self-medicate
Mhm.
in a lot of different ways. And I would say if you numb that feeling, it can have so many destructive consequences in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think
So,
one of the things I'm struggling with now, because like I started this podcast originally to help women who were answering the call to ministry.
yeah.
and so now I'm kind of like, people want advice about pursuing their call. And I'm like there's part of me that wants to be like, no, run, don't do it.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I feel that way.
Right.
Yeah.
But
Uh-huh.
then there's also this
Mm-hmm.
part of me that still believes in the church and says, okay,
Mm.
maybe there are some people who are called to do that. And then there are some people who
Mm.
are not. And then I think there's some of us, like maybe for me, maybe for
Mm-hmm.
you, where we did that for a season and we were supposed to do it for a
Yep.
season, but now God has us in a different place or a different
Mm-hmm.
season. So I guess um if thoughts or not even
Yeah.
necessarily advice, but just yeah, I guess just thoughts or advice for people who are pursuing the call.
Mm.
Um and like kind of like if I knew now, if I knew then what I knew now. No, that's not how you say it.
Yeah.
If I
Well,
knew then what I
I
know now.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it.
I think I would say don't do it full time. Like, so this is born out of personal conviction. I believe that if a church exists, no one should get paid to pastor it. I think that if a church exists, it should have people who lead collectively, but don't get to teach every Sunday and can't make the decisions all the time. I think it should be far more dependent on a community of people who does the dirty work of not letting someone be the demarcated leader, but really fights through the tension of how do we let everyone feel like they're participating. I think that would be a great first step. So I would say be bivocational, really consider what's best. Like you can answer that call, and it doesn't mean necessarily that God wants you to work for a evangelical church that is set up with elders, lead pastors, and all the same things. And if God is up to anything, I think he's very much shaking the church as it is right now and changing it. So I would say and hope that anyone who feels that call recognizes it as a call to do something different and new, not keep it the same way it's always done. Because, like the system you have in place is perfectly designed to give you the results that you're getting. And all we see every week is another scandal from another church where, if you really look at it, regardless of Presbyterian, Baptist, charismatic, or whatnot, it all is structured pretty much the same way and it's producing these same things. So I would say, however you would answer that call, know that I think it's to do something radically different and less um, comfortable or traditional to what you've done before.
Yeah, the structure of the church, and in particular the evangelical church, has really um, like made it. It's like a petri dish for abuse,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It
yeah,
is. And I would say go to therapy. If you're going to answer the call, that's what I would say more than anything. If you're going to go into a church and you're going to ignore me, which you have every right to do, please see a therapist first. If you can afford it, if your insurance covers it, please go deal with your attachment issues, go deal with your childhood wounds. Because if I had known that I had an avoidant attachment style, and that's why I liked being a pastor because I could get love and affection without ever actually having to show them who I really was, then that would have been good for me. If I had known that I was desperately looking for a strong father figure to tell me that I mattered, or if I had known my Enneagram number at 19, I would have been so much healthier and think I could have been just way in a better place. So I would say, don't be 22 without any knowledge of who you really are and think that that means you should answer the call. Like, do the work to become someone who realizes the booby traps that exist in what we call church today for leaders.
oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, not only that, but like your frontal lobe isn't even fully developed until 25.
Yeah, right. That prefrontal cortex is not firing.
It's not. It is not does not have all of the neurons working together.
Uh-uh. No. Not at all. So, and that's what I would say too is I guess I would be wary of this is what I've noticed. It's not a surprise that a lot of these more charismatic, big personality pastors or narcissistic pastors, their staff team is often incredibly young and incredibly naive because they don't know any better. So they don't have something to compare it to. So they're often more likely to go along with potentially abusive or unfair situations. And so I would say, don't be caught up in this idea that this charismatic leader is giving you attention. Do the work to ask, what is it actually like to work here?
Yeah, and that's a good point. So not only are they young, they have nothing to compare it to, and then um, and they begin to formulate uh, a reality that says, "Oh no, this is normal," right?
Yes. Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And it is not normal. Please,
it's
it is
not.
not normal.
Yeah, I know
Not at all.
my husband grew up in an alcoholic home, and his brother will often say to him, "I remember the time. I remember how old I was when I finally realized that is not normal." Yeah,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah,
and I think we need to
yeah.
say that about the
Gosh,
church
that's so
too.
true.
Yeah.
Yes, I do too. And just I I also just, I mean, if Jesus really wanted things to be as black and white as far as truth goes and how we do this thing, then I think he would have gone to greater lengths than telling stories about widows and coins and lost sheep. And so that like need to feel like you're right or have the corner market on what is actually truth, I think is all just a big joke.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that is so true. So true.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, all right. So any I guess other thoughts of wisdom that you really want to share?
Mm.
Maybe it's just something that you're currently an idea that's currently like stirring in you that you're like, I just really want people to know this, you know?
Mm. I would, yeah, so I've been on this. So belonging is a really powerful drug. And what I've been talking to a lot of people about, both still in and recently out of church context, is this it all comes down to belonging. So we're literally like evolutionarily programmed to want to belong. We want to find a tribe so that we can survive. We would find a group that gives us an identity. And I think it's important to know that because when you leave a church, you often then are totally alone. Like when
Mhm.
you leave that community, no one reaches out to you, no one seems to care anymore. And I would say some of it is not personal because those people don't want to threaten their own belonging to the group. And also to realize that a lot of the belonging that the church offers is really conditional. It's not as unconditional as they say. And I just think of all those church signs. It's like, you belong here, like you're welcome as you are. But the truth is, like, but not if you behave these few different ways. Like for a lot of churches, not if you're LGBTQIA plus, then you don't really belong. Or not if you doubt, or not if you openly don't believe in hell, or if you don't behave this way, we won't stand by you. I have some friends who recently decided to leave a church, and on the way out, they're about to have a baby. The pastor said to them, well, make sure you find a community soon because having a baby and not having community will be really difficult. Like, dude, they were just at your church for 5 years and you're suddenly not going to support them? What? That's crazy. And so I've just been on this soapbox about belonging and just recognizing like that's why I was willing to put up with being abused or mistreated for so long or not thinking harder about what I was doing to hurt or harm people because I desperately wanted to belong. And then that's why people wouldn't reach out to me or be my friend afterwards because they were so afraid of not belonging. And as a therapist, I would say do the work to learn how to belong first to yourself. That's
Mhm.
probably a good like step first is learning how to be okay with who you are and belong to yourself. But then also to recognize like where are the places that I'm actually safe? Where are the places that who I am as I am is welcome with no pressure to change as long as what you need to change isn't like abusive or dangerous, right? That caveat's important. But that's kind of my recent kick is it helps me know, oh, that's why I did some of those things or put up with some of that. And it also allows me to then offer forgiveness to people who I feel like never spoke to me again. Is, oh, I'm a threat to your belonging. Like a lot of people from my church networks that I used to be a part of, they haven't like straight up said, a few of them have, but they haven't straight up said, we're not your friend anymore. They've just quietly stopped texting, quietly stopped reaching out. And I can look and go, I'm a threat to your belonging. I have spoken out publicly. Therefore, I'm a bit radioactive and you can't get poisoned by that. And I get it. So that's kind of my soapbox these days.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It is a good point. And some of it is just, you know, it's easier to stay connected when you're in that
Uh-huh.
group. And then you have to make extra
Uh-huh.
effort when you're not in that group.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, yes. It is so much. And so, yeah, and that also puts the world back into gray because I like it to be black and white. I want to be the good guy and them all be the bad guys because it helps me process more easily. But where I really grow is when I sit in the gray and I realize more about that. And I've learned to love it, you know? It's a tension-filled space, but it's a freer space for me.
Yeah, right? Isn't it?
It is. Like it doesn't give you any days off. Like it comes with a lot of existential dread and uncertainty but there's so much freedom in going, I don't know, and I don't have to know. And I actually am okay with that now. And I'm not doing this because, like the Gospel Coalition thinks everybody's deconstructing so they can sin more. And I'm like, no, I did this because I needed to know who God really was and how I could believe in them after what I'd experienced.
It is a lot more freeing, that's for sure.
Yeah, beautifully complex and freeing. It's strange how that works,
I know.
It's odd.
It is painful though, but yeah,
Oh, 100%. We can't lie to anybody. It hurts real
it's
bad.
it's bad. It's bad. I'm finally coming to the other
Uh-huh.
side where I'm like, now it feels better. I'm starting to feel better.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
But
Yeah,
there are still some
absolutely.
days where I feel like I've been punched in the face. So
Oh my gosh. Yep. And I've just learned like, okay, no heavy lifting today. I'm feeling a wound and I'm not going to try to pretend it's not there.
yep, yep. So cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Hmm.
And well, this is so good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for asking me. I'm super flattered that you asked me and listened to a couple of your interviews before and love that we're kind of in that same space doing those things because
Yeah.
I feel like I love seeing more of us doing this on a broader scale because there are just people you'll reach that I never would and vice versa. And so the more people know, like I feel like all of our podcasts are like little lighthouses and they're
Right.
just out there trying to let people who feel kind of lost know you're not alone. And so I love because that's what I think your podcast does.
Yeah, and you too. And I think it's almost like the more um the more of us that are talking about it,
Hmm.
um, the easier it is for people to then start asking questions
Yes.
and to find freedom. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Exactly. Hmm.
yeah.
So yeah, thank you. The other
Yeah.
podcast I get to be on in a couple weeks is an atheist podcast. So I'm
Oh,
kind of
yay.
excited. I know. I was like, really? I was like, I'm not like just totally off the God train. And he goes, oh yeah, I know, but you think hard about your faith, and I'd much rather have someone who does that. And I'm like, all right, cool.
Well, that's
So
exciting. I'll be looking forward to
yeah.
you posting that link. So I'll
Yeah,
check it out
definitely.
for
Let me know
sure.
when this comes out. I'll send you those links to my social media, and then when it comes out, I'll put it everywhere so people know we got to.
We've been trying to tell better stories about women and clergy and the church because we really need to tell better stories. Instead of just complaining about it, what if we flood the airwaves with something different?